The door burst open with the morning light. 4 warriors, faces like carved stone, storming her cabin without a word. In seconds, her hands were tied, her eyes blindfolded, her body dragged through dust and silence. She had saved a dying man. Now they were treating her like a criminal. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The sun had not yet crested the hills when Hannah Whitfield stepped outside, her wool shawl pulled tight against the morning chill. The river murmured softly in the distance, and beyond it, the Mesilla Valley lay quiet, silvered in frost. She moved with the practiced rhythm of someone used to solitude. Quiet hands, steady breath, the kind of silence that didn't come from fear but from long, unspoken grief. Her husband had been gone 6 winters, and in that time, the world had grown hushed around her. No more laughter in the cabin, no more boots at the door, just the click of her kettle, the creak of the porch swing, the wind threading itself through pine and cottonwood. She followed the worn trail to the water, the empty tin pail in one hand, the other brushing dried sagebrush out of the way. That's when she saw him. At first, he looked like part of the earth. Sprawled among the rocks, blood mixing with dust, his body half shaded by the low-slung limb of a juniper. He was young, but the kind of young shaped by fire and famine. His skin was copper dark, his chest rising in weak, unsteady jerks. Blood soaked the side of his shirt. A bullet wound, maybe 2, fresh. She froze. Everything in her said, "Don't. Don't get involved. Don't bring trouble to your door." White women in this valley didn't pull injured Navajos into their homes. They bolted their doors and whispered about raids. But something in his face held her. Not fear, not hate, just exhaustion and pain. Without a word, she dropped the pail and knelt. Her arms strained under his weight as she dragged him across rock and root, slipping once in the frost, catching herself with a curse. It took all her strength to get him inside. She laid him on the pine table, still sticky with the day's bread dough. Her hands moved like memory. Herbs from the tin, cedar ash from the hearth, water boiled and poured over a cloth that once belonged to her mother. She muttered prayers she hadn't said since she buried James. Please, please don't die in my home. Through the night she worked, the fire flickering low, the rifle propped in the corner like a quiet warning. She wiped sweat from his brow, spooned drops of honey water between cracked lips. His body fought, trembled, then stilled. When he finally opened his eyes, they were dark with confusion, but also recognition. His lips barely moved. "You saved me." And in that moment, Hannah's world, which had long ago shrunk to the size of a cabin and a memory, cracked open, just a little. Enough for one breath, enough to remember she was still alive. It began with hooves, distant at first, rhythmic and deliberate, like war drums muffled by earth. Hannah had just stoked the fire, the warmth barely nudging the chill from her cabin walls, when the sound drew closer, sharpened into urgency. She set her tin cup down. Then came the boots, thuds against frozen ground, followed by fists against her door, loud, measured, demanding. She opened it. 4 Navajo men stood before her, carved from shadow and silence, their faces unreadable but their presence undeniable. They wore layered hides and beadwork that shimmered like warnings in the morning light. One carried a spear. Another had a revolver tucked into a rawhide belt. But it wasn't the weapons that struck her. It was the eyes, stern, searching, ancient with weight she could not comprehend. "You took him," one said, his voice like stone dragged across stone. "You kept him. That was not your place." Hannah blinked, mouth parting in instinctive protest. "He was dying. But they didn't come to hear explanations. Two of them stepped forward. One brushed past her without asking. The other followed with intent. Her hand went to her chest as though that would steady her racing heart. Inside, the scent of herbs still lingered. The man she'd nursed, Nakai Yaji, she would soon learn, lay silent on the table, breath shallow, cheeks sunken but alive. One of the warriors froze at the sight, his expression cracked, not with gratitude, but with fury. "He is Nakai Yaji," he spat, voice laced with disbelief and judgment. "Son of Chief Red Arrow." Before the name could settle, rough hands seized Hannah's wrists. Rope scratched her skin, the fibers unforgiving. Her cry was soft, breathless, but still no one looked at her as a woman who had saved a life. Only as someone who had trespassed into something sacred. "You touched sacred blood without permission," the man said, as another pulled cloth over her eyes. "You will answer for this." Darkness closed in. The world shifted beneath her feet as they dragged her outside. The earth was cold, the morning sharp with dust and betrayal. Her boots stumbled against rocks she couldn't see, her balance stripped along with her dignity. The door slammed behind her, sealing the warmth she had made, the effort she had given, the life she had tried to preserve. Each step away from that cabin wasn't just a distance traveled. It was a piece of herself unraveling. The ride bled the color from the world. They traveled wordlessly, winding deeper into the canyon lands where the sun did not reach, and the stone walls seemed to close in like judgment. Hannah sat slumped between two riders, her hands still bound, her shawl clutched against her chest, not for warmth, but for memory, for the threadbare weight of a life that no longer felt hers. No one struck her, no one even looked at her. And somehow that silence hurt more than a blow. The land changed as they descended. The air thinned. The rocks turned dark and sheer, veined with ancient iron. Somewhere far above, hawks screamed, unseen. But down here, in the canyon's ribs, there was only shadow and the echo of hooves on stone. By the time they reached the caves, night had already taken the sky. The mouth yawned open, jagged like a wound in the cliffside. Inside, torchlight flickered across the walls, casting long, swaying shadows that made the space feel like it was breathing. Smoke curled upward and vanished into the black. The chamber was vast, bigger than any church Hannah had ever seen, yet it held no altar, only people. Elders, seated in a perfect ring, their eyes calm but unreadable. They did not shout, they did not curse. They looked at her with a sorrow that made her throat tighten. Then the woman stepped forward. She wore a cloak of midnight wool stitched with white thread that shimmered like constellations. Her face was deeply lined, carved by time and sun, and her eyes held the stillness of someone who had buried too many names to weep anymore. "You did not ask," she said. Her voice was a whisper, but it cut like cold iron. "You do not know our ways, and now the chief's son might die with white medicine in his blood." Hannah bowed her head, the weight of misunderstanding pressing hard on her spine. "I didn't mean harm," she said, barely louder than breath. The old woman did not flinch. "But harm has been done." No one raised their voices. No verdict was cried out. And yet judgment fell all the same. 3 days, alone, in the stone cell behind the fire circle. Not to suffer, they said, to reflect. And so she did. Each morning, a bowl of water, a heel of bread, nothing more. On the second night, the cave wept with her. Salt pooled on her cheeks, her hands clasped beneath her chin. "I only wanted to help," she whispered to the cold walls, to the silence, to the stars she could not see. But no voice answered, not even her own. It was the third morning when the silence cracked, not like thunder, but like the first breath after drowning. Hannah sat cross-legged in the shadowed cell, hands folded over her knees, back pressed to cool stone. Her thoughts had emptied over the past 2 days, like rain seeping through a cracked roof, memory by memory, until even grief had gone quiet. She no longer imagined voices or footsteps. She expected nothing. And so, when a voice did come, rough, rasped from the throat of someone still healing, she at first thought it was the wind playing tricks. She saved me. Her head lifted slowly. Nakai Yazi stood at the mouth of the chamber, a walking stick in one hand, his other gripping a bundle pressed to his chest. He was thinner, the sickness still etched beneath his cheekbones, but he stood like a man who had chosen to stand. His gaze swept the circle of elders, not with defiance, but with purpose. "She broke no law," he said, steady now. "She acted with spirit." The elders remained still, their faces carved from shadow and firelight. "She stayed," he went on, voice low. "When others would have run, she gave nothing for gain, and she gave me back my breath." Then he turned. His eyes met Hannah's. For a long moment, no one spoke. She didn't recognize herself in his expression. There was no fear, no pity, just something deeper, something honoring. He stepped forward and held out the bundle in his arms, her quilt, the one she'd draped over him in the worst of his fever, the one her mother had helped stitch, square by square, long before death made her hands idle. He laid it gently before the elders, as one might offer a sacred object. "A gift," he said, "to show I live." No judgment followed, no verdict spoken. But something shifted in the air, a soft exhale of tension, a release of unseen weight. And later, as dusk fell over the canyons, they untied her wrists not with ceremony, but with respect. They rode her home beneath a purple sky, the world gilded in quiet forgiveness. When she stepped into her cabin, the hearth was cold but untouched. The pine table was just as she had left it. But resting in the center, catching the last light of day, was a single white eagle feather. She didn't touch it. She didn't need to. Later, when she stood before the small mirror beside her bed, the one she used to avoid, she did not see the widow who had buried love beneath a cottonwood tree. She saw a woman the world had tried to forget and failed.